Evolutionary.org, episode 610 coming your way. So we're talking about Mike Van Wyck Steroid Cycle. So the Wickster is on this one. And this guy, like, admittedly, like, I didn't know much about this guy. I've seen him before, but he is an absolute beast. And it's a shame that it seems like injuries really caught up to him. So we're going to talk about this in this podcast. We're going to go over his life, his career. We're going to talk a little bit about his social media influences and his diet, his training. We're going to speculate on his steroid cycle based on what we know and what he's talked about and all that good stuff. So let's talk about his early life and career to start. And Mike, he's a Canadian bodybuilder from
Yeah.
Toronto, Ontario, just north of the border, north of New York State. Born in 1980. The guy, we're going to get in, a little bit more of his early life. Big fan of wrestling as a kid. Always dreamed of being big as some of his favorites. He loved Davey Boy Smith and the British Bulldog, which is your boy Mobster. And he played several sports, baseball, football, rugby, just the typical stuff that they like to play in Canada. He fell in love with bodybuilding. No hockey, though. That's the one thing he didn't play, it seems, although that's the number one sport in Canada. But he liked the other ones. And in high school, he started to train in his school's weight room. His favorite bodybuilders he loved were Dorian Yates, Ronnie Coleman, Flex Wheeler. They were big back in his day as a teenager and into his older years. He went to college in Rhode Island, so he earned a scholarship, and believe it or not, he played defensive line on their football team. So that's some little nugget that a lot of you may not know about him. So that was kind of, I thought that was interesting because he's a Canadian and he went to college in the United States to play American football. That's kind of interesting because a lot of times I never really thought that a lot of people did that. I always figured I knew some Canadians that came across the border to play for hockey, for like Boston College or Vermont or one of those schools, but I never really thought they were coming across the border to play American football. So that's interesting. That's something you don't learn every day. But what was interesting is he got a scholarship, and what was even more impressive to me is he didn't
Mm.
even start playing organized football until his junior year of high school. So to just basically start playing a sport fresh when you're 16, 17 years old, and then 2 years later, you're getting offered a scholarship. Granted, it's not for a great football program because Rhode Island is not a great football program. They really, like, once every 5 or 10 years, they might have someone make it into the NFL as, on a practice squad or something. And you've got universities like Alabama or Ohio State or Michigan or Florida State even, and they're ripping out 6, 7, 8, 9 guys every year in the NFL draft. Rhode Island doesn't do that. They're not a football factory. So, but it was still a great accomplishment to even get offered a scholarship to go to a American football team like that. So that just shows you how much of a talent he was. So while in college, he suffered numerous injuries. He was happy to be done with the brutal sport of football. You got to imagine playing defensive line. Every snap of the ball, it is a car crash. You're slamming into the offensive line. So that injuries and people are rolling up on your legs on every play. You got to watch out for that. So football, very dangerous sport. He decided, look, I'm going to go to bodybuilding. I want to do bodybuilding. So, Mobster, you want to touch upon his bodybuilding career?
Yeah, I mean, we're looking here, Steve, in terms of his activities on the stage here. First competing in his first show was 2005 and won the Canadian National Championships in 2010. Next year, winning his pro card. So look again, Steve, what you just said. How quickly is that? Literally 5 years, first show for the Canadian Championships, and then literally the next year getting your pro card. That's like 6 years max, which is crazy quick, really, even for a lot of pros. And then competing as a pro for several years. Arguably, his top titles were the 07 CBBF, and I can't even begin to pronounce Missy Swagger. I'm thinking it's somewhere in Canada, obviously, Steve. Championships as a super heavyweight, first and overall, which is great. So that's his class and winning the overall competition. Then the 08 CBBF Ontario Championships, again as a super heavyweight first. 09 CBBF Canadian Championship super heavyweight first and overall, and contest weight was 270, and off-season weight was as high as 320. And in fact, I've seen a posing video, guest posing video, Steve. He was quite the lump, as we like to say in the United Kingdom. Big, round, relatively small waist, not super conditioned in this guest posing, Steve. But 320 pounds at his height is impressive as fuck. So there's the thing. I'm going to touch upon here, Steve, in terms of what we talked about earlier on with another show that we just recorded, which is his influence on social media. And in the last day or so, I've watched a bunch of videos doing some background and show research to talk about what we're going to talk about in a short while. And he's out there, Steve. He's out there. And I don't just mean in terms of putting out information for himself, but being interviewed by other people. And his niche, if you like, his stick, is that he's been invited on the shows that you wouldn't call bodybuilding shows. And he's been invited on there possibly because of the growth of PED use across pretty much every spectrum, certainly by social media influencers. And I'll let Steve jump back in with a comment about certain things that he said on social media. But he's out there being interviewed on channels that, as I say, are not traditionally bodybuilding specific, nutrition specific, training PED specific, and being interviewed by these people because they've got into training themselves and they've invited him on to pick his brains, but also because he's kind of forced himself to become educated in certain particular areas. Of course, he's out there coaching and advising people. So again, he's got that. And then he's got his own practical knowledge from his experience of training himself. But what I think the thing that I liked, what came across to me the most was, and I don't think he quite put it in his words, but he's kind of forced himself, as I said, to become educated in such a way that this huge, great lump of a man, even now he's still a big, strong-looking motherfucker, half covered in tattoos. You wouldn't, to look at him, expect him to be able to explain these things in an everyman, invited onto a different kind of channel kind of way, and yet there he is, sitting down, bottle of water, bottle of juice, looking fucking crazy, fucking big, even if the person on the other side of the table trains, and just being able to come across an hour and a half, Steve, talking about certain subjects, both himself, the subject in question, and so on and so forth. And this is multiple shows, Steve. This is not just collaborations. That's come on as an expert and sit there in a way that perhaps only the very top pros in bodybuilding, and let's be honest, Mick, as good as he was, certainly in Canada, was never an Olympia level physique, but his niche has become educational, in depth, looking at the subject, and especially when it comes to training, which I'm going to touch upon. But of course, a hot topic, as always, is going to be PEDs, the use in sports, and so on and so forth. And there he is on these things. It's not quite, news at 10, news at 7 kind of stuff, Steve, but it's very, very close to being that kind of area. What about the stuff that he has said on social media that I know that you put into our notes for the show? I'll let you run that part of it as well.
Yeah, and I want to first talk about Drake, and he actually did a collaboration with Drake, and actually boosted quite a bit. So that might tie into what you were saying, Mobster. A lot of the fans from Drake look at this big dude who's got like tats all over him, and they're like, they would never even like check him out, but because he did a collaboration with Drake, that was a smart move. And that kind of because he was basically taking Drake and working out with Drake. And Drake obviously is not a bodybuilder. He's a rapper. He's a singer. He's not, so it's just like you're taking this musician and you're putting him in the weight room. And that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool to do that. And that really, really helped him. Drake, of course, is also Canadian. So that's that Canadian connection. Canadians like to do stuff like that to help each other. So, and Mike is old school when it comes to social media. He's called out the idiocy he's seen on platforms when it comes to workout videos. Got to remember, he's not some old boomer here. He was born in 1980, so he's barely.
But I started training, Steve. Never mind born.
Yeah, he's barely Generation X, almost a millennial. So for him just to call out social media, it's got to be something. So, and the main reason he's calling it out is the ridiculous cinematography. He says that guys will show the way they over dramatize it. So, and they're like, it's kind of like the intro to the wrestling when you watch the fake wrestling on TV. They're like, this guy comes out, it's like, it's like, and they make weight training look, like it's like going to battle, like we're going to battle. It's like, dude, it's fucking weight training here. You're
And they're
not going to
30
fucking
pounds,
battle.
Steve. That's
Right?
you're
You're
only
not
doing
watching
100,
your buddy get
200
his
pound
head
bench.
blown off right
Yeah.
next to you, okay, with a grenade. All right. This is fucking weight training here. Stop over dramatizing this shit. So this is what he says. I'll let you comment on it real quick, Mobster.
Yeah.
He laid into these phony social media influencers, and he made some waves when he did this. And I think a lot of people use this to kind of also gain clicks. So they kind of use this, pretended to be so offended by it. But he says
Yeah.
there's a specific couple of people who are really fucking laying it on thick in the fitness industry right now with their hyper motivational, fucking hyper intense training footage. He says, but like one, you're not elite athletes. You know what I mean? Their livelihood doesn't depend on how fucking well you work out or like what intensity you have. You're just doing it for you. Stop fucking acting like the most mundane exercise is the most fucking intense part of your day. It's like we're all here doing the same thing, but if I put music behind it and I do this cable row and I put some fucking cinematic shit on it, and they get like, oh, I'm following you here to the machine, the grip, the light in the eyes, the sweat on the brow. Mobster?
Yeah, Steve. I mean, I remember the bodybuilding magazines, especially the 80s and 90s magazines, right? So we're talking about spray on water, spray on oil, everybody training shirtless, etc., etc. And unfortunately, you and I are kind of we're not guilty. We're kind of we actually kind of fall in a particular gap because so much of our videos are educational. So much of the stuff we talk about is nature and physics and making sure that you do your research and all this kind of stuff, right? And the reality is, unfortunately, that's not sexy. That doesn't sell. That doesn't get you traction. Yeah, it's just not sexy, Steve. It doesn't get you traction. Unless you're doing some sort of like 800-pound bench. What the fuck? So the younger guys haven't got an 800-pound bench. So what they got to do? They've got to come to the gym and they've got to do a most muscular with their shirts off. They've got, please God, they've asked the gym for permission. You got the whole issue of people have getting thrown out of gyms and you know, only getting likes because they said, "Oh, that girl over there is doing something stupid," and why is that person not wearing shoes and all this kind of motherfucker. Do your shit. Go to the gym and do your shit. Look, I mean, we were talking about this. I said earlier on. I said in a show that we just recorded, the idea that people. I think the comment was about someone doing a kneeling on the ground, one arm lat isolation exercise or something like that, and then you see that they're doing 4 or 5 exercises. I do like one, Steve, one back exercise. I don't do the same goddamn one all the time, but I rotate through different ones, but it's one. And I've got a 53-inch fucking chest, which is, of course, lats and fucking pecs. Right. So I do literally one exercise for chest, but it's fucking heavy as fuck, as you know. Right. So this is what he's talking about. And that's what he means. It's this idea that in order for you to get people to look at your shows, to record your videos, to subscribe and whatever else, you've got to do dramatic bullshit. The machine guns are going, and I'm going to put a cap in his ass, blah, 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 blah. But motherfucker, you're doing 100-pound bench. Shut the fuck up. Get in there and do something hard and fucking hardcore. It's not pretty. It's not aesthetic. It doesn't need dramatic music. Put it on if you want, mate. I get it. Fine. Edit. Don't just have something with nothing going. Maybe sex it up a little bit, but don't pretend that you're going to make millions of dollars by doing pussy ass shit that really is not reinventing the wheel. You haven't discovered anything exercise wise. The stuff that worked before 50 years ago still fucking works. And hard work works versus shitty weights. And over dramatic videos might sell, they might get more traction, they might be sexy, but you're not really helping. We just recorded a show on Mike Rashid, and I said the whole thing that I watched with Mike was 99% of his video was educational as fuck. This is how to train. This is how to do the movement. And Mick is arguably, Steve, Mike even, is even better at that. The whole thing that we're talking about, and I'm going to touch on this now as well, Steve. I'm going to talk about diet after. So the whole thing with the training stuff, and I'm going to talk about a couple of things that he does as well in the gym, is this idea of getting absolute maximum you could possibly can. And one of the comments he makes, I'm going to read this because this is actually quoting him himself. He says, I came from a background of training for football, which is about power and moving away. Over the past few years, I've become a master, I'd argue that he actually is, Steve, at body mechanics, which is all about subtle shifts in your posture, your grip width, your foot stance, and what you have you to hit the muscle more effectively or target a very specific part of the muscle that you need to improve. He says, onwards, I handle decent weights, but it's never more than I can feel good contractions and stretches with. Now, that would be for Mike himself. I would actually say that, like Mike Rashid, his ability to get the best out of his clients and the people that he works with these nuances, just do this thing with your hands, move it to this position, don't just have it in a straight line, vary the stance of your feet, and now you're hitting the quads more, whatever, right? That kind of stuff. I got told some of those things very early on, which was fantastic for me, really. And I didn't appreciate it at the time 2 years later. And I know how, when I'm talking to people in the gym, Steve, it's the same thing. Hold your hands this way, it's more pec. Hold your hands this way, it's more tricep, and so on and so forth. And sometimes those things are ingrained in you from the get-go, and this is why certain people respond very well, even with normal genetics. And sometimes it takes a long fucking time to learn these things. Let me touch upon back, right? So back, this is a typical back workout, quoted from himself again. Standing rope pull downs as a warm-up, 5 sets of 15 reps. Wide grip cable rows, and I'll touch upon that in a second, 5 times 10 to 15. Close grip overhead pull downs, I'll touch on that as well, 5 times 10 to 15. Dumbbell rows, 5 times 12. Nothing special there, Steve. Wide grip overhead pull downs, 3 times max. Now, you notice again that he's doing 2 lots of pull downs, but he's changed the grip. He talks about specifically wide grip cable rows and so on and so forth. So let me just I'll touch on this quickly, Steve. Right. So why different grips? Right. Give you an example, and I'll use myself as an analogy again. I will train medium grip more often than not because I'm trying to pump my back up so that my bench press, which is I'm pushing off my back muscles, and there's always an argument to pulling the bar down as well as pushing it up, comes from that back strength, rear delts, upper lats, the teres major, the muscles in the armpit, and whatever. And ironically, you will always see heavy bench pressers like myself doing heavy back. And then you go, right, so what position do I bench in? Well, I'm a close grip bencher, so I don't need to go wide. But Mike's more of a bodybuilder, so why does he do certain things? We know that you can broaden your back over time, especially if it's time under tension for years at a time, by doing a wider grip. But we also know, for example, Steve, that you can have issues with your joints. We talk about wear and tear on the joints and looking after yourself in a certain particular way. So you notice that he's varied the grip. The dumbbell rows will be close to the body. A close grip overhead pull downs. There's probably the element there of bicep and back muscles being worked and so on. I'll touch on the next body part here, Steve, before we move on. Chest, machine bench presses, warm-up 315. Again, the fact that he's doing warm-ups, none of that jumping in straight away, appreciation for long-term health, joint repair, and so on and so forth. Incline Smith machine presses. I'm not a big fan of Smith machine, but I can see why you'd be doing it. That's 5 times 8 to 15. Flat dumbbell bench presses, 5 times 10 to 15. Notice that's quite common with his exercises. That's the 3rd or 4th time I've said it in the last couple of minutes. Incline dumbbell flies, 4 times 12 to 15. I'll focus on that momentarily. Cable crossovers, 4 times 12 to 15. I shall also talk about that. And dumbbell pullovers, 3 times 15 to 20. So let me go back to the incline Smith machine press. Okay. So as a free weightlifter myself, I'm not a huge fan of being locked into a particular group. So, because we're talking about what we were talking about before, and I've jumped into it. But here, because he's a bodybuilder, he wants to look at specifically isolating certain portions of the muscle. And here, for example, in a modern bodybuilder, it's way more upper chest, filling that muscle in underneath the chin and the neck, versus old school bodybuilder, which is more flat and decline, which is bottom heavy pecs. Arnold would be a good example of this. And then the cable crossovers. Now, a comment here, and I've actually demonstrated this exercise for people in the gym when we'll be talking about cable crossovers. You will see a lot of that, Steve. And the trick with cable crossovers, and I think Mike would be very, very good at this, would be different positions. And I've demonstrated this, which is low, cables held down, handles down your body, below the sternum, middle, which is out in front of the sternum, and high, which is above the sternum. And this is to work all 3 different portions of the chest, Steve. Let's talk about diet now. I'll let you jump back in for this particular one.
So, look, he's talked about his diet. He's written some diet examples that he's done. One of the cool things he did was he went over his contest diet ahead of his pro competition in an interview. And he did include some brands that he likes. Obviously, he's pushing these brands. I'm not going to mention the brands because it's not important. And a lot of time bodybuilders, they'll push specific brands, and they're probably the worst brands, you could take. you know. So, and a lot of times they're not even taking these supplements. So just a full disclosure on that. So, but I'll just tell you what he did. You could, you know, take it for what it is. A lot of times they'll say, yeah, I take this pre-workout, I take this intra-workout, I take this post-workout, and really they don't even take any of that. They just are, you know, trying to promote the supplements. So just keep that in mind when I kind of go over this. But this is his diet pre-contest. And you remember, this is a guy who's on gear, who's taking a shitload of stuff, who's huge. This isn't
Yeah.
something you want to take if you're a normal
Yes.
180-pound guy, because you're probably just going to end up fat and sick doing this
Yeah.
type of diet. But this is his diet, so it's kind of fascinating. 8 a.m., 8 egg whites, 100 grams oatmeal, quarter cup blueberries, and 2 scoops of whey. 10:30 in the morning, 12 ounces chicken breast, 2 baked potatoes, 1 cup green beans. 12:30 in the afternoon, 100 grams oatmeal with 3 scoops whey. 3 p.m., 12 ounces ground bison, 1 cup green beans. 6:30, 12 ounces chicken breast, 1 cup green beans. 8:15 p.m., 50 grams whey protein. 8:30 to 10 p.m., that's his training, and he takes intra-workout supplements while he trains. So it's an hour and a half of training with intra-workouts. 10:15, 15 minutes after he works out, he takes 50 grams of whey and 1 scoop waxy maize. And then 11 p.m., very, very late, it's a 12-ounce sirloin or eye of round steak. So we're
That's
seeing a
late
lot.
as fuck, Steve.
Yep.
Late as fuck for training.
So this
And
is a
yeah.
lot of protein, very little in the way of fruit. And then he's using the baked potatoes and the beans as his vegetables in this. So this is really lots of protein, lots of veggies, several different, 4 different servings of vegetables. But he's definitely likes his red meat with the bison
Yeah.
and steak,
Yeah.
and then the chicken, and then he's getting in some carbs with the oatmeal and of course the potatoes. And so this is pretty much, yeah, this is something that someone of his size would definitely be taken. I don't see anything too abnormal about this. And notice he's eating from 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. So it's a huge
Yeah,
window.
that's a long.
And it's not going to be
Yeah.
like the healthiest thing to do, but it will definitely bulk you up and make you a big guy as he was. 330 pounds, 320 pounds. This is the
Yeah.
way you got to eat if you want to get big. And I'm sure Mobster, you eat like, you know, very similar to this as well.
Occasionally, Steve,
Yeah.
I was just fascinated by the fact he's training so late in the day. God damn, man, I'll be up after fucking night if I trained at that point of the day. Something that Steve's taken from the diet, and I'm going to mention this in a moment as well, is this pre, post, and pre, intra, and post workout. And I'm going to touch on that briefly, very quickly, guys. And this is a steroid portion. He talks about his very first steroid cycle in one of his interviews. It isn't actually a show where he specifies the stuff that he's done. We're going to guess at certain particular parts, but these are the parts I 100% is information on. First cycle, test suspension was taken every 3rd day, and on his first cycle, Steve gained 25 pounds in 4 weeks, which is definitely someone who's a responder, to say the least. He mentions briefly using debo in a prep, but unfortunately, the rest of the interview we went in a different direction, which was a shame, because I'd love to have seen a full prep discussed. That would have been absolutely amazing. And he says that how, for example, he says not necessarily knowing any better. And me and Steve have covered this in shows, taking more and more and more of whatever he was using before. He just took higher dosages. So you can see that he's changed from that. I didn't know what the fuck I was doing to way more educated. What works? What should be taken with things? For example, he says, not knowing as much as I should have done, I was quite often taking more of the same thing, meaning, for example, multiple DHT derivatives, Steve, versus actually putting one thing with something else and having a synergy that we know works. Says does not recommend Halo. And in fact, there was a video we talks about how he nearly got out of his car and attacked a meter maid because he was real frustrated in the middle of a prep, etc. He does talk about referencing Charlie Francis, both for training and specifically PED use, saying this person had the greatest knowledge at that particular time. So he started then to pay attention. Now, the biggie for me, and this ties in with what Steve's talking about with the food just then, is insulin. Admits having used a lot. And when Steve and I talk about a lot, we're talking about anywhere between the low end of 10 to 20 IUs a day for a low end pro, right the way up, Steve, as you appreciate, the 30 to 40 IUs a day. So I'm guessing, again, with the food that you've just talked about, and especially when he was competing, we would have seen a lot. And one of the things he talks about specifically is Milos Sarce's protocol. And I'm going to expand on that. So there's definitely an element of both before, pre, during, intra, and post-workout nutrition. And here's the thing that he had to say, Steve, which I thought was a standout kind of comment. And I've actually said the same thing on the forums, but not necessarily for the same reason. It does tie in. Most people that I know that have tried insulin have ended up fat. And he said the same thing, Steve. He said the problem is we know that the insulin is super anabolic. He said, but most people carry on, in his words, eating shit, crappy diets. He says, just because you're on insulin, you can't get away with eating crap. You have to eat clean and do the goddamn protocols. And that means, for example, the Milos Sarcev thing, Steve, is the pre-workout type products, and then depleting the fuck out of yourself, doing giant sets, etc., to really sort of deplete the muscle of glycogen. And then towards the end of the workout, as that one video that I saw years ago, using a kind of apple sauce, and then definitely sitting down right afterwards, quote unquote, the anabolic window. But here you are still depleted because that's what you've done, and you're using insulin, and then obviously putting food in at the same time. He says there's a lot of people walking around with these special meters to test your sugar levels. And he said, look, trust me, I know when he's, to put it crudely, I feel fat. And I know when I need to be taking something food wise, and I will have something, some great form of carbohydrate. And then if it's still a little bit moody, I've then added some extra food and so on and so forth. But that's become, of course, because he's learned over time what works, making sure. But he emphasized, I'll read this line because I think it's important, Steve. Emphasizing eating the right food to get the best results versus most users getting fat eating anything. What do you think on his protocol, Steve, and specifically like steroids that he may or may not have used?
So, based on that, that's just why you see him eating throughout the day. When you got insulin in your system and you got the growth hormone in your system, you're able to nutrition partition. And of course, taking the waxy maize and the intra workout supplements and the whey protein, that all becomes like an extra weapon when you're on all the stuff. So now you see why he gets up in the morning, he takes his insulin, he takes his HGH, he eats constantly throughout the day during his workout. Hour and a half workout, he also has to take an intra workout. Now you see why he has to do that, because of all that insulin he's taking. So I would, dumb it down like this: insulin, HGH, 8 to 15 IUs per day of each. Usually guys will do double the amount of HGH as they would insulin. Trenbolone acetate, 800 milligrams per week. Decadurabolin, 1,000 milligrams per week. Testosterone E plus testosterone suspension, as you mentioned, Mobster, 1,200 milligrams a week total. So with the test suspension, you would take it pre-workout at your leisure. It wouldn't be something you use every workout, but it'd be something he'd want to use in the majority of his workouts, just to get in some extra boost before his workout. And then Dianabol, as you mentioned, Mobster is one of his favorites in preparation. I would say 80 milligrams per day, and that would really get him, big, and really get those pumps going and get him some good size. So that would be a rough estimate of a typical prep, a cycle that he'd put together ahead of a contest for just getting big and big and big.
I would also, Steve, I mean, just on the test suspension again, before we finish the show, listen, guys, why test suspension? Well, because we know that he responded incredibly well for it. If you, and I've said this to you before, sometimes you don't need to change things up just because. You don't need to have extra steroids you didn't use last time, although it can be useful to know how you respond to other drugs. But here's the thing. We know that he responded incredibly well to it. 35 pounds in 4 fucking weeks is someone that's blown the fuck up. And, arguably, maybe it wasn't the best thing from the try from day one, but then he repeated it. Well, why wouldn't he repeat it, Steve? He gained 35 pounds on that first fucking cycle. God damn, motherfucker, that works for me. I'm going to do it again. That makes the most sense. Is it the healthiest option? No. Maybe the dosages were all over the place. Who knows what the fuck he was getting back in the day? But he responded incredibly well. Now, he could be a hyper responder. You're not 320 fucking pounds and bad genetics. You've got great genetics for size. So we know that it worked for him. And again, when we talk about these cycles, it's what was working for that individual, and they're telling us what they're taking. Sometimes it was a fucking mistake. They shouldn't have done that. Should have done something else. Sometimes it was just bad advice. But look here again. He added 35 pounds in 4 fucking weeks. I would argue it was perfect for him at that time. He was a great responder, and he must have been training his arse off. And certainly, in terms of his training, he's learned to get the most out of it. And I like Steve, with Mike again, that he's out there putting this information out and helping other people get the fucking goddamn best out of their workouts, and even telling them the mistakes I've made, and this is what I would have you do now, and like just with the insulin, Steve. So I like that kind of stuff. And again, sitting on shows, being invited to collaborate on shows which are not traditional bodybuilding shows, maybe for the reasons that Steve said, is a plus, because it means that you're out there in the media, positively influencing people, giving them good scientific advice, learn from years and years of experience, and in a way that people that don't follow bodybuilding and training but are interested in PEDs and getting into shape can understand. That has got to be a positive, Steve. We can't argue against that. So let us know what you think. Post comments below. Let us know. Come onto the forums. Disagree, agree. Let us know what you think. Please note, we are not doctors and opinions. Ours is our view and based on our experience and views on the topic. A podcast for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment apply.